speaking today as a spokesperson and a keen advocate of the Asphalt Industry Alliance. I'm also the Market Development Manager with Total Energies for the Bitumen Division, and I'm also the Chairman of the Institute of Asphalt Technology, Pennines Branch. In case you're unfamiliar with the AIA and what we do, we're a partnership between the Mineral Products Association and Eurobitume. These are the trade associations for the aggregate and asphalt producing and laying companies and the bitumen supply companies in the UK. We work together to promote the uses and benefits of asphalt to specifiers, decision makers and the general public. Now, many of you will be familiar with our annual local authority road maintenance or alarm survey. I'm here today to set out the key findings from Alarm 2022, which was released last week. The aim of the alarm survey is to take a snapshot of the state of funding for local road maintenance and the resultant condition of the network. It does this based on information provided directly from those responsible for its maintenance and combines both quantitative and qualitative research, so straight from the horse's mouth from the local authorities themselves. This year is the 27th successive report, and it's received responses from a record number of local authorities. It provides robust data for analysis and underscoring the value that those working in the sector place on its annual findings. It's used by the local authorities for benchmarking and is viewed by stakeholders across the sector as a valuable tool for tracking local road conditions and funding. Even the DFT uses alarm as evidence or a data point when it goes to Treasury looking for funding. The key headline finding from this year's alarm survey is that the backlog of carriageway repairs has increased by a staggering 23% on last year's reported figure. Local authorities now tell us they would need £12.64 billion as a one-off to bring the network up to the condition that would allow it to be managed cost effectively going forward as part of a proactive asset management approach, which of course you'll know is what they're already expected to do. And they have told us it would take them 9 years to carry out this work if they had the surety of funding and resources to do so. Against a backdrop of increased costs caused by inflation, the impact of rising interest rates on borrowing, the message from this year's alarm submission is clear. Those responsible for maintaining our local roads are fast approaching a point now where they're no longer waving, they're drowning. They've got a legal responsibility to keep our roads safe, but flat funding allocations to carriageway maintenance in real terms mean they have to make difficult choices about keeping their networks open and safe today versus improving structural resilience for today and tomorrow. Alarm highlights this reported backlog of carriageway repairs is now the equivalent of £75.7 million for each local authority in England and Wales, or to put it another way, nearly £62,000 for every mile of local roads. The big jump reported in this one-time catch-up cost comes despite an increase in average total highway maintenance budgets, which are up 4% across England, London and Wales on 2021 levels. However, when you drill into the numbers, what you can see is that not all local authority highways teams benefited from highways maintenance budget increases on last year, and there remains big variances between the authorities. There are a small number receiving significant capital investment, impacting on the average. The underlying picture is one where the majority, about 56% of local authorities, actually reported a highway maintenance budget cut or a freeze on last year. We can see similarly, local authorities told us that less of the overall maintenance budget is being invested into maintaining the carriageway itself. The spending on the carriageway is down, and that's even before the impact of the significant rise in costs is factored in. The percentage of the highway maintenance budget allocated to the carriageway over the last year is reported at 51%. This compares negatively to an average of 54% and a high point of 58% detailed in the alarm surveys over the last 7 years. The highways engineers told us this was due to growing pressures to maintain other parts of the highways asset, such as the structures, the signage and the drainage. So when it comes to maintaining the carriageway, they're just having to do more with less. Overall, across England, London and Wales, central government is reported to fund 45% of authority budgets allocated for highway maintenance. while the remaining 55% comes from sources. In England, Alarm highlights that DFT provides around 92% of government funding for English highway authorities. That equates to 41% of local authorities' total highway budgets, the majority of which is not ring-fenced specifically for highway improvements. The remainder comes from sources such as the Department for Levelling Up, housing and communities, grants and regional growth funding. In London, since the government withdrew funding to TfL in 2018, the vast proportion of highways budgets in the capital have come from London Borough's own sources. This year, just 10% of budgets are reported to originate from central government sources, with the vast majority, 92%, coming from borrowing and other borough revenues, such as parking fees. In contrast, in Wales, Alarm reports 69% of funding came through the Welsh Assembly government and 31% from the authority's own sources. Local authorities told us the current means of allocating funding, with capital budgets for enhancements to the network and revenue budgets for road maintenance, compounds the challenging carriageway maintenance funding situation. Revenue poor engineers told us they often have to opt for maintenance treatments that can be completed within certain timescales, and that's regardless of the implications for carbon emissions and their own authorities' net zero pledges. It does seem a contrary situation, really, for highway engineers to be placed in, especially given the need to consider material usage and a whole life of carbon emissions, whole life costs of carbon emissions. Or as one respondent said in relation to the drive on net zero, why are we even having this discussion about the pros and cons of CapEx versus TOTEX still? Of course, carrying out road maintenance as part of capital works still leads to efficient highway improvements, regardless of the funding stream. But with over 40% of local authorities reporting transferring capital funds intended for highways improvements to supplement revenue budgets for traditionally maintenance work, this will be masking the size of the average budget shortfall reported. Alarm 22 reports the average shortfall in the annual carriageway budget has leapt nearly 50% to £6.4 million per authority. Significantly, this is the first time the annual shortfall total has exceeded £1 billion. Just to clarify, the reported shortfall is the difference between the sums received in the financial year and the amount a local authority would need to keep the network up to current target conditions and prevent further decline. So this brings us to what Alarm 2022 tells us about the current condition of our local roads. Unsurprisingly, given the budget situation already described, it's a story of some slight improvements in surface conditions, while the overall structure of our local roads continues to decline. Road Condition Index data reports the condition of the surface of the carriageway, as opposed to the condition of the whole road structure. Now, the analysis of submissions received show that while no category of road achieved the ideal profile, there have been improvements on last year. There's now an additional 2% of the network classified as green, or being in a good state of repair. The equivalent of 4,102 miles of the local road network has improved conditions over the last year. The feedback highlighted the highways engineers focus on managing the amber areas where some deterioration is present and taking steps to return them to green, if only temporarily, has then resulted in fewer miles being marked as amber. But this has been matched by an increase in those marked red, poor overall condition. So this year, an additional 3,500 miles of local road have been classified as red. Overall, 11% of the network, or 22,000 miles, is classified as red. That is the equivalent of travelling between London and Birmingham 175 times. The data from those take a more holistic assessment of the carriageway asset. It's combining the surface conditions as indicators of road life. Structural maintenance will be required when surface maintenance won't suffice. The chart shows the structural condition trends for England, London and Wales as reported in the last 3 Alarm surveys, but overall Alarm 2022 reports that 18% of the network, or nearly 37,000 miles, is now defined as being structurally poor, with less than 5 years life remaining. This is an increase on last year's figures of more than 2,000 miles. So if we look at slide 10, we start to look at potholes. Surface repairs have a part to play in extending the life of local roads. But fixing potholes is indicative of a network on the edge. Plus, you can argue that it's wasteful when it comes to materials usage and carbon emissions. Alarm reports that over the last year, 1.7 million potholes were filled. That's about the same as the previous year, the equivalent of one being filled every 19 seconds. Overall, £107 million was spent filling potholes. The total spent over the last 10 years is more than £1 billion. Nearly 7 million, or 6.9 million, has been paid out in compensation claims relating to potholes. 78% of the total 8.9 million paid out in compensation. Each mile of road is costing £96.70 in compensation claims and costs. In total, nearly £20 million was paid out, combining the compensation and cost of dealing with claims, which surely could have been better spent on the carriageway. And we look finally at conditions. Alarm 2022 reports the average road surfacing frequency now stands at 70 years, with a road being resurfaced today not likely to be done till 2092. The discrepancy between the reported resurfacing frequency for principal roads and the rest of the network in all regions continues to highlight how local authorities have to prioritise key routes as current budgets are not sufficient to adequately maintain the whole network. To summarise, the link between continued underinvestment and the ongoing structural decline and below par surface conditions of our local roads is clear. The AIA believes the country's ambitions to encourage active travel, plus cutting waste and carbon emissions, won't be achieved with a short-term approach to funding. It just can't deliver a first-rate local road network. The findings from the AIA's alarm survey in recent years highlight that the longer it takes for the funding to be put in place to tackle the backlog of repairs, the more it's going to cost to put right in the future. A stitch in time, in other words. 4 years ago, the AIA calculated an additional 1.5 billion per year was needed for 10 years to bring local roads up to scratch. In the meantime, the networks continued to decline, and Alarm 2022 indicates this figure has now reached 2 billion a year over the next decade. Now, we recognise there are many demands on the public purse, but looking ahead, clearing the backlog of local road repairs will remain impossible without an increase in highways maintenance funding, and without it, the resilience of our local roads will continue to decline. To ensure we have a safe, resilient, sustainable network on which we can all rely, a longer-term approach and significant investment is needed. Now, in slide 13, we'll talk about the path to net zero asphalt. Before I ask if anyone's got any questions, I want to touch on the findings from an expanded section of research within Alarm 2022. For a number of years, we've asked about local authorities' approach to materials, but this year we've delved deeper. We've gone into current thinking about the path to net zero, and that may be of interest to a lot of people here today. So Alarm Response told us 85% of local authorities already have a net zero pledge, with over half, 55% of them, pledging to reach their targets by 2030. Despite this, only 8% of respondents confirmed their local authority has a quantified target to reduce carbon footprint resulting from the procurement of road surfacing materials. However, when planning and specifying road maintenance, they do take a number of measures to reduce the carbon footprint, including using warm mix asphalts, lower temperature asphalts. Over 60% of respondents widely include warm mix asphalt now on their asphalt specification list, and of those not currently including it, around 73% are looking to adopt it in the future. Despite this, feedback from our members indicates that being included on the specification list doesn't yet translate into daily actual use. Somewhere between 5 and 10% of total production volumes are currently warm mix asphalt, which is a massive lost opportunity and a low-hanging fruit for carbon reduction targets. Approximately 29% of local authorities report that new laid asphalt materials over the last year were explicitly specified to include recycled materials such as secondary aggregates and reclaimed asphalt. And it's already accepted as standard practice to use these materials. And it's a good thing to mention that asphalt is probably the most widely recycled product in the world currently. Generally, the view is that the supply chain is very receptive when it comes to supporting local authority highways engineers' carbon ambitions, especially in the use of recycled materials. But the message we heard repeatedly is they need more data. They need data to help them make the best to make the best decisions, basically, for sustainable procurement. Now, industry is working with National Highways in particular to agree common rules, methodologies, and data sources to ensure that the data clients get is consistent, comparable, and not enshrined in confusing greenwash, which helps nobody. It's a quick overview of this year's alarm survey. A reminder is I'll give you a reminder, the full report, which covers a lot more than I've touched on today, can be downloaded from our website at www.asphaltuk.org. And I'll take any questions now. Thank you.